In 1968, right after the murder of Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Elliott walked into her third grade classroom. And she said, "Okay, boys and girls, I have an announcement to make. I need all the blue-headed kids to go on, blue-eyed kids to go onto one side of the room." Blue-headed, we're getting a little concerned there, aren't we? Then I need all the brown-eyed kids to go on the other side. And if you got green eyes, you can go with the brown-eyed kids too. So, I'm here to tell all of you that brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. She said, they are smarter, they get better grades, and you know why they are so much better? Because they've got this thing called melanin. They've got more melanin than the blue-eyed kids do. And you can tell that by their eye color. And their melanin makes them better people. They're smarter, they're funnier, they don't smell as bad, everything. And she said, okay, so today, all the brown-eyed kids get some privileges. Brown-eyed kids get 5 minutes of extra recess. If a blue-eyed kid wants to drink from the water fountain, he has to get a cup, and he has to put the water in a cup first. Why? Because we don't want the brown-eyed kids to get the blue-eyed kids' germs. And she said, now remember, boys and girls, we need to keep the brown eyes and the blue eyes separate all day today. And she said, but let's get back to class. So she started teaching. And anytime any one of the blue-eyed kids missed a problem, she asked, okay, now why did Johnny miss a problem? And one of the brown-eyed kids raised his hand and went, because he's a bluey. Then one blue-eyed kid tripped at one point, and she said, of course a blue-eyed kid would trip. That's just what they do. By the end of the day, the brown-eyed kids were starting to treat the blue-eyed kids terribly. They even wrote in their little journal at the end of the day that said, I thought that I could treat them worse. In fact, I was even thinking I could punch one of these kids if I wanted, because I was brown-eyed and he was blue-eyed. This became one of the classic social experiments. And if you're worried about the blue-eyed kids, don't worry. The rest of the day, they switched places and they got 5 minutes of extra recess. But this shows how quickly that we get into camps, how quickly it becomes us versus them if we but allow it to happen. Today is the third week of my homily series. I've been preaching on the cardinal virtues. The first week of Advent, I preached on prudence. The second week, I preached on temperance. This week, I'm preaching on justice, and next week, I'll preach on fortitude. What is justice? Well, the Catholic tradition defines justice as the firm and perpetual will, so it's something I desire to do, the firm and perpetual will to give the other what is due to him. So that's pretty simple. If I am in debt to a person, I fulfill justice by paying back my debt. Also, there are certain things that are due to another person merely because they are human beings. I owe it to anybody to respect their common humanity. I owe it to anybody to give them human dignity. I don't give them human dignity, but I respect their human dignity. Honestly, justice is a very simple virtue. It is really just the golden rule applied in our life. What is the golden rule? We know. Do unto others as you would like to have done to you. What we owe to somebody else, we need to give. And what other people owe to us, we have a right to ask for. In the Catholic tradition, we talk about 3 types of justice: legal justice, distributive justice, and commutative justice. And just to go over those quickly, legal justice is the justice we see in courts. That when a person does a crime, he serves his time. Legal justice. Second of all, distributive justice is what you might call vertical justice. So that would be that which is due to somebody who is above you or below you. So if the government owes its citizens certain things, such as good roads, clean waters, safety, those sorts of things, we would call that distributive justice. It's the government doing for its inferiors what is owed to them. And commutative justice is justice that happens among peers, among equals. So going back, if I owe my brother $5, then I need to pay my brother back those $5. Simple. Often we like to talk about justice. We like to say lots of beautiful things about it, and those are all really wonderful things. But the fact of the matter is, justice is simple. We give to others what is due to them. But there's a wrinkle here. There's a wrinkle because when we define justice, the church says that justice is justitia ad alterum, which means justice to another. And she says that justice does not exist among families. A husband and a wife are not just to each other. A father and a child, a mother and her child are not just to each other. Now that sounds odd, doesn't it? Why could that be? Because the two are one flesh. The family is like one person. And so we're not required to be merely just to our family members. We're required to love them. And so justice doesn't exist between a husband and a wife because a husband and a wife's relationship is not merely tit for tat. You owe me this, I give you that. No. A husband and a wife's relationship is pure and total self-gift, which is what Jesus shows us on the cross. A father gives himself entirely to the child. So this is the church's teaching on justice, and that's pretty simple. What are some of the sins against justice? Well, we know that racism is a sin against justice because everybody deserves respect in their common human dignity. We know that usury is a sin against justice. Usury is a fancy term for actually interest on loans, that especially when it's very high interest to such an extent that somebody can't pay it back. But even in the church's tradition, almost all interest is considered a sin against somebody because it's considered a form of thievery. Stealing is against justice because I'm taking something that is somebody else's rather than giving something that is somebody else's, giving something to that person. Lying is a form of a sin against justice because everybody deserves the truth. And even sins that could be considered like against our common planet, so excessive pollution or not taking proper care of our planet could be considered a sin against justice because we all deserve to live in our common home. This is something that our human dignity demands. But the problem is that we aren't called to mere justice. Remember what I said a minute ago? That justice is justitia ad alterum, justice to another. The church points out to us that we as Christians are not called to see anybody else as the other. Let's go back to that first story. In the story I told earlier, Miss Elliot made half the class one side against the other. And what happened at that point? Not only did charity fall, not only were they not treating each other like brothers and sisters, but they started treating each other like others, and they weren't even being just to them. We aren't called to see humankind like that. Why is that? Because there is nobody in the universe who is truly the other now. Because Jesus Christ has bought all of mankind. And remember, I said that justice doesn't exist in families. We are all members of one family. No matter where you're from, what your skin color is, what your background is, what language you speak, we are all either members of the one family of Jesus Christ, or we are potential members of the one family in Jesus Christ. And so we're not called merely to be just, although just is good. We're called to love all people. We're called to have charity, which is the love of God for all. We're called to give ourselves even to the point of it hurting. And so when we look at all the issues, whether they're social justice issues, whether they are legal justice issues, whether they are merely justice issues within our families, we have to realign our thinking and not merely think in a tit-for-tat way. We've got to think in a way of dying on the cross for all of mankind, because the law of charity, the law of Jesus Christ's love, perfects justice. It makes it into something that is greater than merely exchanging between equals. It makes it to where we're exchanging our hearts for each other. But let's think about how often we do the opposite in church life. How often do we end up even treating people in our own church as the other? We can see this sometimes with certain communities that are brought together. It's always shocking to me when I see a parish community not welcome in one of their brothers and sisters because they speak a different language. Now, we have the Hispanic community here, and we do a wonderful job of welcoming them, but that's not always true. And if we're honest with ourselves, we might even find a certain level of inhospitality in our hearts sometimes. And why have we done that? Why does that happen? Because we don't see them as our brothers and sisters. We see them as the other. And we're not even giving them justice, let alone love. Or how often do we in our church divide ourselves up into groups? For example, maybe some people don't like it when a priest wears a cassock a lot, and he becomes that side of the church. Or maybe it's the opposite. Somebody doesn't like it when Father wears sandals often. And suddenly we have the traditional Catholics against the progressive Catholics, and we've stopped treating each other like brothers and sisters in Christ. And we've started treating each other as others. And we're not even giving them the justice that demands, let alone the love. How often does this happen in our families? That we start dividing up the families between practicing Catholics and non-practicing Catholics. Or the Democrats versus the Republicans, or whatever it may be. We start dividing us up, and we don't even treat them with justice, let alone with love. Our job as Christians is to treat everyone with the love of brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. It says today in our gospel that a man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony, to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. We are called to be like John, giving testimony to the light of Jesus Christ. And that light is the love that he poured out on the cross for each and every one of us. And we are called not merely to be just to each other, but we're called to love one another fully. When we do this, we give testimony to the light. We show all mankind, all humankind, all people throughout the whole world that Jesus has come, perfecting justice and giving us true love. And this is the light that shines in our hearts and purifies us and gives us that happiness for which we so desperately yearn. This is the call to be Christians. We are called to be men and women of love, love that perfects justice and unites all people in the one family of Jesus Christ.